Hi everyone, my name is Becky and I like to read. Today I thought I would share with you 5 of my favorite historical reads from this year. Historical books are something that I tend to read a lot of. They're either historical romance, historical fantasy, or historical fiction. So I have 5 books and they range from middle grade to adult. Some are horror, some are historical fiction, some are historical fantasy, some are historical romance. So let's get into it. One of my favorite historicals that I read this year was a YA, and it is The Gilded Wolves by Roshani Chokshi. Unfortunately, I don't have the book to show you because I lent it to my friend to read. I liked it so much, I wanted her to read it. I read this book pretty early in the year, so forgive me if I forget some information about it, but I'm pretty sure this takes place in the late 1800s in Paris, France. This is an older teen book, and it is about a group of friends who come together. They each have different abilities, some of them magical, some of them not. And they are trying to help this man named Severin find a key to help him reclaim his magical inheritance. It is so good. It's such a smart book. It is one of the books that has the best diverse cast I have ever read. They all feel very authentic. It is a found family trope, which is one of my favorite tropes, and I just loved all of the characters. There are 5 perspectives within this story, and you get to follow each of these characters and understand what motivates them and what their strengths and what their weaknesses are, and how they work together as a family. I highly recommend you check this out, even if you don't like YA. My next historical pick is, again, another one I don't have with me because I lent it to my friend, but this one is actually a middle grade, and it is called Echo Mountain. This is set during the Great Depression, and it is about a family who pretty much have to sell off everything they own to move into one home on this mountain, try and live off the land, and try to survive. It is very much a slice of life story, so there's not a lot of action, there's not a lot of problems they have to overcome other than the big one that is just trying to survive. It's such a simple and quick read, but I think it gives some insight into what people during the Great Depression probably had to deal with. I actually learned a couple survival tactics. I don't know if they would work or not because they're in a book, but you know, if I'm ever forced to live off the land, I'm going to try and attempt some of the things I read in this book to see if they work. There is a very small magical realism element to this book, but it's barely noticeable, but I think it just added just a little touch of whimsy to it that I really enjoyed. So if you like middle grade and you like slice of life stories and you like familial relationships within a story, I really recommend this one. I really enjoyed it. The next historical that was a favorite of mine is actually one that is set during World War II, which tends to be the vastly popular choice of historical fiction is set during World War II. But this one had a little bit more uniqueness to it than others I have read set during this period because it focused on characters outside of concentration camps and how they're surviving as opposed to those inside them. And that is The World That We Knew by Alice Hoffman. This is basically a story about a woman who goes to a local rabbi and asks for some help for protection for her daughter so that she doesn't end up in a concentration camp, and what she gets ends up being a magical creature. This girl has to travel with this magical creature whose only mission is to protect her. It really surprised me. I went into it knowing very little, and I wasn't expecting the magical realism aspect that it involved. It added a little bit of a Jewish folklore and mythology that I know very little about, so I really enjoyed it and I highly recommend this one. The next historical that ranked highly on this list was actually a reread for me, and I read it as part of the Diversathon Readathon that I partook in this year, and it is Never Seduce a Scot by Maya Banks. This is the story of Evelyn, who is deaf, and she's very smart, but her clan, they don't really understand what being deaf entails, and so they think she's kind of mentally slow and she's not all there. But she is pretty much put into an arranged marriage with their enemy's clansman. He is actually the one who discovers that she is deaf, and it's just such a sweet romance about how he protects her and she protects him, and he learns how to communicate with her and understand her. and it is so good. I don't read a lot of historical romance anymore, but this one, upon reread, is one that I still highly recommend and really enjoy. So if you like historical romance, if you like romance in general, and you want an alpha protective hero, and you want like a stubborn, sassy, fiery female character, I highly recommend this one, and it does have disability rep, so check it out. And the last historical I want to share with you is just a random find I found at my local Barnes & Noble, and that is The Resurrectionist. This cover caught my eye, first of all, and this is set in the 1800s in Philadelphia. This is about a young man growing up, and he's very interested in death and what the human body looks like, and like abnormalities within the human body. And so when he grows up, he becomes a doctor and he studies these things. He comes up with this thesis that the mythological creatures that we're all familiar with, like centaurs, minotaurs, and mermaids, that they are what we evolved from, or what other species evolved from. And I thought it was such a cool concept. Some random tidbit about me is that I honestly believe that humans evolved from mermaids. You can't change my mind about that. I don't care what science says. That is what I believe, and you will never change my mind about that. So seeing that represented in a book, I was just like, hell yes, I am here for it. Half of the book is the story of this fictional doctor, and then the other half of the book is like a scientific research paper that this fake doctor created that's like part of this book. And it shows like diagrams of the mythical creatures that he's talking about, and their bones and their muscle structures, and how he thinks they evolved and things like that. And it is just such a cool story. The main story of this book, it's kind of a little dark, and this doctor is kind of a little crazy, but I really enjoyed it, and I highly recommend, if you're into weird books, super short, I highly recommend you check out The Resurrectionist. So those were 5 historicals that I really enjoyed this year. It was really hard for me to narrow down just 5, but I managed. So let me know down in the comments if you've read any of these books, or if any of them sound good to you and you would like to read them. So until my next video, thank you so much for watching, and read something great for me.